Welcome to Tell Me More Stories Told as Podcast. Get ready, because today we're diving headfirst into the life of a truly monumental figure.
We are indeed. We're talking about Sir Isaac Newton.
Exactly. And we're aiming to go beyond the sort of standard textbook picture. We want to uncover the story, the person behind the science.
That's the plan. We'll be digging into historical accounts, looking for those details that really make you curious, the things that make you lean in and think, okay, tell me more about that.
We'll definitely cover the groundbreaking stuff, maths, physics, optics, but also, the perhaps more surprising parts of his life, the things that maybe don't fit the neat scientific box.
Absolutely. His roles outside science, his early life.
Yeah.
It's a rich story. So where should we kick things off? The very beginning.
Let's do it. His arrival into the world was pretty dramatic, wasn't it?
It really was. Born on Christmas Day, 1642. That's using the old Julian calendar, mind you. And born prematurely.
And tiny, right. There's that famous description from his mother.
That's the one. His mother, Hannah, apparently remarked he was so small he could have fit inside a quart mug.
Wow. Just imagine this colossal intellect starting out so physically fragile.
And the circumstances weren't easy either. His father, also named Isaac, died about 3 months before he was even born.
That's tough. And then his mother remarried when he was quite young.
Yes, when Isaac was just 3, she remarried a clergyman, Barnabas Smith, and actually left young Isaac in the care of his maternal grandmother at Woolsthorpe.
That must have left a mark, being separated from his mother like that.
It seems almost certain it did. There are records, including a list of sins he wrote down as a teenager, which includes a rather shocking entry, threatening my father and Mother Smith to burn them and the house over them.
Goodness. That speaks volumes about his feelings toward his stepfather and, well, the whole situation. Hints at maybe some deep-seated resentment.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? It perhaps sheds some light on the intense, maybe sometimes isolated focus he had later in life. That early emotional turmoil, it shapes people.
Definitely. But despite that rocky start, he did get a formal education.
He attended the King's School over in Grantham, learned the essentials for that time, Latin, Greek, and importantly, a solid grounding in mathematics.
But there was a bit of an interruption, wasn't there? A detour into farming.
Ah, yes, the farming experiment. His mother, widowed for a second time, pulled him out of school, thinking he should become a farmer.
How did that go?
Terribly, by all accounts. He apparently hated it, showed absolutely no aptitude or interest, spent his time reading or building models instead of, minding the sheep.
Lucky for science, then.
Very lucky. The headmaster at King's School, a man named Henry Stokes, saw his potential and thankfully persuaded his mother to let him come back.
Didn't he really start excelling then? There's a story about a bully.
Right. The story goes that he wasn't initially the top student, but after getting into a fight with the school bully, he was determined to beat him academically as well. That sort of competitive drive pushed him to the top of the class.
It makes him seem so much more human, doesn't it? Not just a disembodied genius. And he was already tinkering, building things.
Oh, absolutely. Even as a schoolboy, he was known for making quite intricate things, sundials, detailed models of windmills. That practical, hands-on mechanical aptitude was clearly there from early on.
Which must have served him incredibly well later. So, from Grantham, it was on to the big leagues. Cambridge.
Trinity College, Cambridge in 1661. Though his entry wasn't exactly glamorous, he started as a subsizar.
Which meant?
Essentially, he was working his way through, performing tasks, basically valet duties, for wealthier students to cover his costs. It wasn't until 1664 that he was awarded a proper scholarship.
Okay, so he earned his place. What was he studying initially?
The standard curriculum was still heavily based on Aristotle, but Newton was diving into the newer stuff too. Philosophers like Descartes, astronomers like Galileo and Kepler, he was soaking it all in.
And the sparks of his own genius were already starting to fly.
Definitely. By 1665, even before he officially got his BA degree, he'd begun developing the fundamental ideas of what would become calculus, and he discovered the generalized binomial theorem. Pretty advanced stuff.
Right as things were really taking off for him intellectually, then something major happened.
Yes, the Great Plague of London hit. It spread, and as a precaution, Cambridge University closed down in the summer of 1665, shortly after Newton had received his BA.
So he had to leave Cambridge.
He did. He returned home to Woolsthorpe Manor. But this period of forced isolation, away from the formal structure of the university, it turned into something extraordinary.
The famous Annus Mirabilis, the miracle year, or years actually.
Exactly. Those 2 years or so back at Woolsthorpe, from roughly 1665 to 1667, are often described as maybe the most productive burst of creative scientific work by a single individual ever.
It's almost unbelievable what he achieved in that short time, largely on his own.
It really is. He laid down the foundations for differential and integral calculus, his method of fluxions, as he called it. He made fundamental discoveries about optics and light, and he began formulating his theory of universal gravitation.
All in about 2 years. Mind-boggling.
Utterly. By May 1665, his calculus was already sophisticated enough to calculate tangents and curvature. Then in 1666, those famous experiments with the prism.
Splitting sunlight into colors.
Precisely, leading him to the radical conclusion that white light isn't pure, but is actually composed of all the colors of the spectrum mixed together. That color is an intrinsic property of light itself, not something created by the prism.
A complete paradigm shift in understanding light.
And at the same time, the ideas about gravity were taking shape. That period was just incredibly fertile for him.
You know, thinking about how he managed all this, here's something interesting I read, sort of a unique fact about his working method.
Oh, do tell.
He was apparently an exceptionally organized note-taker. He used detailed alphabetical indexes for his notes, much like we might use a database index today to cross-reference ideas across different subjects.
Ah, that makes sense. He was described by some historians as a Janusian thinker. Janus, the Roman god with two faces, looking both forward and backward. Newton could connect seemingly completely separate fields like mathematics and physics, or even alchemy and optics. Those meticulous notes must have been key.
A map of his interconnected thoughts. Okay, so the plague eventually subsided.
Yes, and he returned to Cambridge in 1667. Things moved quickly for him then. He was elected a Fellow of Trinity College.
Now, being a fellow usually came with a certain requirement, didn't it? Something religious.
It did. Fellows were generally required to take holy orders in the Church of England, become ordained priests. And this was a potential major problem for Newton.
Because his own religious beliefs weren't exactly standard.
Far from it. Privately, he held very unorthodox Christian beliefs. He rejected the doctrine of the Trinity, for instance, which was a core tenet of Anglicanism and Catholicism. He considered it a corruption of early Christianity.
So how did he navigate that, becoming a fellow and then a professor?
Well, he managed it. In 1669, his mentor, Isaac Barrow, resigned the Lucasian Professorship of Mathematics, a very prestigious chair, specifically so Newton could have it.
At only 26.
Astonishingly young. And crucially, Newton managed to obtain permission directly from King Charles II, a royal dispensation, exempting him from the requirement to take holy orders.
Wow. Royal intervention to keep the genius focused on maths.
Essentially, yes. It allowed him to continue his work at Cambridge without compromising his conscience. And his duties as Lucasian professor weren't just pure maths. Interestingly, they included instructing students in geography. He even edited and published updated editions of a major geographical work of the time.
Shows his breadth again. Okay, let's really dig into the core scientific contributions now. Calculus is probably the big one, mathematically speaking.
It's fundamental, yes. As we mentioned, he developed it independently. There was a rather bitter dispute later with Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz over who got there first.
Right, the priority dispute.
History generally credits Newton with developing the core ideas first, probably in the mid-1660s, while Leibniz published first in the 1680s. Leibniz's notation, however, the Didactic symbols we still use, proved more convenient and is what became standard.
But Newton's method, his fluxions, was the breakthrough.
Absolutely. It provided the mathematical tools to describe and calculate rates of change, velocity, acceleration, essential for physics. Some argue his original geometric approach in the Principia actually offers deeper physical insight than just the symbolic manipulation.
Okay, then optics. We touched on the prism experiments.
Yes, demonstrating white light is composite. That led directly to a major practical invention, the reflecting telescope.
To avoid the problems with lenses.
Exactly. Lenses refract light, and they tend to refract different colors slightly differently, causing chromatic aberration, that color fringing you can see. Newton realized using a curved mirror to focus the light instead would eliminate this problem. His design is still the basis for most large astronomical telescopes today.
And he published this work.
He did. His 1672 paper, New Theory About Light and Colors, presented to the Royal Society, was foundational. It sparked debate but ultimately revolutionized the field. He even seemed to anticipate ideas about light behaving as both wave and particle centuries ahead of his time.
Just incredible foresight. And then, the one everyone knows, gravity.
The law of universal gravitation. It's hard to overstate its impact. The famous Apple story, whether it happened exactly like that or not, captures the essence. Realizing the same force pulling the apple down is what keeps the moon orbiting the Earth and the planets orbiting the sun.
It unified the heavens and the earth under one set of laws.
Precisely. His laws of motion and the law of universal gravitation, published in the Principia, explained Kepler's laws of planetary motion, explained the tides, the paths of comets, even the slow wobble in the Earth's axis called precession. It mathematically cemented the heliocentric model.
He basically wrote the rule book for the universe as they knew it.
He really did. He solved the two-body problem, how two objects orbit each other under gravity, and made significant inroads into the much harder three-body problem. He even did calculations related to air resistance, sort of precursor to aerodynamics, and made one of the first scientific estimations of the Earth's age based on cooling rates.
And his mathematical toolkit went way beyond calculus too, right?
Oh, definitely. The generalized binomial theorem we mentioned, Newton's identities and Newton's method for solving equations, work on classifying cubic curves, finite differences, foundational ideas for vector analysis. The list is just immense, a true mathematical powerhouse.
So his reputation must have been growing rapidly.
Immensely. He was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society in 1672. But the real game changer was the publication of his magnum opus in 1687.
Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica. The Principia.
Often just called the Principia. It's arguably the single most important scientific book ever published. It laid out his laws of motion, his law of gravitation, and derived Kepler's laws from first principles. Its impact was immediate and profound. It made him internationally famous.
Okay, we've covered a huge amount of his scientific work. And folks, if you're finding this deep dive into Newton's world as fascinating as we are, just a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss future explorations on Tell Me More Stories Told His podcast.
Good point. Because Newton's story doesn't stop with the Principia. His life took another interesting and perhaps unexpected turn.
Right. He gets involved in, of all things, the Royal Mint.
He does. In 1696, he moved to London to take up the post of Warden of the Royal Mint. Then, in 1699, he was promoted to Master of the Mint, a very senior position he held until his death.
And this wasn't just like an honorary title. He actually got stuck in.
Oh, completely. He took it incredibly seriously. This was a time when England's coinage was in a terrible state, clipped, counterfeited. Newton oversaw a massive project called the Great Recoinage.
Applying his scientific mind to currency.
Absolutely. Improving the physical quality of the coins, the accuracy of their weight and composition, introducing milled edges to prevent clipping. He really threw himself into the administration and the more practical aspects.
And here's another one of those amazing fun facts. He wasn't just an administrator, he was practically a detective too.
He really was. This is extraordinary. To combat counterfeiters, Newton apparently went undercover. He disguised himself, visited taverns and shady spots to gather intelligence on forgery rings.
No way. Isaac Newton, scientific genius, moonlighting as an undercover agent.
It sounds like fiction, but accounts suggest it's true. He gathered evidence, interviewed witnesses, and acted as a prosecutor. He successfully prosecuted quite a number of counterfeiters, including a particularly notorious one named William Challoner.
That is genuinely incredible. It adds a whole new dimension to him. So he's running the mint, prosecuting criminals. What about Cambridge?
He effectively retired from his active duties at Cambridge around 1701. His focus shifted to London, the Mint, and also the Royal Society, where he was elected president in 1703, a position he held for the rest of his life.
And he received the ultimate establishment honor, too.
Yes, he was knighted by Queen Anne in 1705 during a royal visit to Cambridge, Sir Isaac Newton.
Quite the journey from that tiny baby in the cord mug.
Yeah.
His later work at the Mint continued to have impact, right? Even influencing the gold standard.
Indirectly, yes. A report he wrote for the Treasury in 1717, setting the relative value of silver and gold, unintentionally made silver undervalued and led to it flowing out of the country, effectively putting Britain onto a de facto gold standard.
Even his financial reports had huge consequences, though his own finances weren't always secure.
No, even he wasn't immune to financial speculation. He apparently lost a substantial amount of money, maybe £20,000, a huge sum then in the collapse of the South Sea Company bubble in 1720.
A reminder that even genius doesn't guarantee investment success. So, how did his life conclude?
He died in his sleep in London on March 20th, 1727, according to the Julian calendar. He was 84, and he was given a burial place of immense honor.
Westminster Abbey.
Indeed. He was the first scientist to be buried there, a testament to the monumental stature he had achieved and the shift in how science was being perceived.
Let's pivot slightly to Newton the person. What do we know about his personality, his private life, his beliefs?
Well, he famously never married. Some contemporaries suggested he wasn't really driven by passion or romance. There was one very intense friendship with a younger Swiss mathematician, Nicolas Fadio de Dullier.
Ah, yes. I read about that. It ended badly.
It did, quite abruptly and mysteriously, around 1693. This coincided with a period where Newton seems to have suffered something akin to a nervous breakdown. The exact reason for the friendship's collapse are unclear.
And his temperament? Modest genius or...
He could appear modest, certainly, famously saying, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." But he could also be incredibly prickly, fiercely protective of his discoveries, and prone to holding long and bitter grudges. The dispute with Leibniz over calculus is a prime example.
Right. That wasn't exactly amicable. And his religious beliefs remained unconventional throughout his life.
Very much so. He wrote extensively on theology, biblical interpretation, and chronology, often trying to reconstruct what he saw as the original, uncorrupted form of Christianity. His rejection of the Trinity remained a private but deeply held conviction. To the mainstream church, he would have been considered a heretic.
And alongside science and theology, there was this other major preoccupation: alchemy.
Yes, a huge amount of his time and effort went into alchemy. It's estimated maybe 1 million words of his surviving manuscripts are devoted to alchemical experiments and studies.
Which seems strange to us now, mixing hardcore science with, well, alchemy.
It does to our modern eyes, but for Newton, the lines might not have been so distinct. He seemed to be searching for fundamental principles about matter and transformation, whether through physics or through these more esoteric alchemical traditions. He saw connections we might miss.
Trying to understand the deepest secrets of nature from all angles. And speaking of strange, there's that odd plague remedy associated with his alchemical notes.
Ah, yes, the toad remedy. It's found in some unpublished notes from that plague period, 1665-66. The suggestion involved, well, suspending a toad in a chimney for 3 days.
A toad
Yeah.
in a chimney.
Yes. The idea, apparently rooted in sympathetic magic, was that the toad would absorb the venom of the plague from the air. Then the dried toad or powder made from it, mixed with some other unpleasant ingredients, could be worn as an amulet or perhaps even ingested as a treatment.
Wow. Okay, that is definitely a tell me more kind of detail. It really highlights how different the worldview was, even for someone like Newton. Science was emerging, but older ideas were still very much present.
Exactly. He was a figure bridging worlds, pushing the boundaries of rational mathematical science, but also deeply immersed in traditions we now see as mystical or pseudoscientific.
So bringing it all together, how do we sum up Newton's legacy? It feels almost too vast.
It is immense. He's consistently ranked as one of the absolute most influential scientists in history. The Principia is a cornerstone of modern science. The unit of force, the Newton, is named for him. He fundamentally changed our understanding of the physical universe.
And that apple story, maybe not literally true, but it sticks for a reason.
It does, because it captures that spark of insight connecting the everyday, a falling apple, with the cosmic, the moon's orbit. That universal vision is key to his legacy.
Isaac Newton's story, then, is so much richer and more complex than just the equations or the famous anecdotes. It's a tale of this incredible, relentless curiosity.
A journey from those fragile beginnings we talked about, this tiny baby, to becoming this towering intellect of the Enlightenment, reshaping how humanity saw the cosmos. But also a complex man, driven, perhaps difficult, deeply religious in his own way, fascinated by alchemy.
Absolutely. A life full of discovery, but also contradictions and surprising turns, like his time hunting counterfeiters at the Mint.
We hope this deep dive has given everyone listening a richer picture, sparked some curiosity, maybe made you want to, well, tell me more about certain aspects.
Definitely. What stands out most to you listening? Which part of his multifaceted life makes you pause and wonder?
And perhaps here's a final thought to leave you with. Newton famously declared hypotheses non fingo, I frame no hypotheses, emphasizing reliance on empirical evidence and mathematical deduction. That principle revolutionized science. Yet, this same man poured enormous energy into alchemy and biblical prophecy, areas far removed from empirical testing as we know it. What does that juxtaposition tell us about the nature of genius, the boundaries of knowledge, and maybe the human drive to understand everything, even the hidden or the mystical?
Something to definitely ponder. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of Isaac Newton.
It's been fascinating. Until next time on Tell Me More.